The debate hall was already electric, the air heavy with tension, when the cameras caught a moment that no one could have scripted. The moderator's question had barely finished echoing when Obama leaned forward, his tone calm, his eyes steady, and his words cutting with surgical precision. "It's curious," he began, pausing just long enough for the audience to lean in, "that a man who built his platform on attacking immigrants built his home with one." The words had barely left Obama's lips, yet their weight hung over the hall like storm clouds. The moment was no longer just a sharp exchange between two political heavyweights. It was a spotlight trained on the contradiction at the heart of Trump's image. For years he had railed against immigrants, branding them as threats, as burdens, as outsiders undeserving of the American dream. Yet here stood his wife, the very embodiment of that dream, a woman who had crossed borders, built a life, and risen to the most visible role beside him. That irony was not lost on the audience. It wasn't just a clash of egos anymore. It was a revelation of hypocrisy, one so glaring that the nation watching could not look away. Trump had built his political empire on walls, bans, and fiery speeches promising to keep people out. But the foundation of his own family told another story, a story he wanted buried, a story he never wanted, dragged into the unforgiving glare of live television. Obama knew exactly what he was doing. His remark wasn't just a jab at Trump's marriage. It was a framing of the larger narrative, a mirror held up to America's values. Was this country truly going to accept the demonization of immigrants when the very family inside the White House was touched by the immigrant experience? Was dignity reserved only for some, or was it a universal promise written into the nation's DNA? The stakes shot far beyond Melania herself. To immigrant families watching from their couches, this was validation, a reminder that their sacrifices, their journeys, their struggles carried the same worth as anyone else's. To progressives, it was the hypocrisy finally exposed. The man who demonized the immigrant story owed his closest partnership to it. And to Trump's base, it was a moment of cognitive dissonance, a glimpse into the cracks of the narrative they'd been fed. Trump froze, his mouth half open, his face struggling to hold the smirk he always wore when challenged. His eyes darted toward the crowd, then back at Obama, the disbelief washing over him in real time. It wasn't just a line. It was a scalpel slicing into the hypocrisy Trump had spent years papering over. And the cameras caught it all, the close-up of his tightening jaw, the flare in his nostrils, the twitch at the corner of his lips. Disbelief cracked into anger, the flush rising across his face as though the insult had pierced deeper than any debate jab before. The audience, sensing the imbalance, shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, hungry for more. Others looked stunned that the moment had even happened on live television, unfiltered, unrestrained. It was the kind of remark that cut not with cruelty but with truth, and that made it sting even more. Trump tried to speak, his voice faltering in the opening syllables before he caught himself. The image was unmistakable. A man rattled, thrown off script, and unraveling under the weight of a truth he couldn't easily dodge. Obama didn't press further, not yet. He sat back, letting the silence work for him, the power of the moment echoing louder than any string of words could. The crowd buzzed, the nation watched, and in living rooms across America people whispered the same thought. This was different. This was personal. This was history happening in real time. And as Trump's calm posture slipped further with every second, one truth became clear. This was only the beginning. But no one expected what happened next. Trump's anger only magnified the moment. The more he bristled, the more the contrast sharpened. On one side, rage, deflection, denial. On the other, calm truth, delivered without theatrics. The divide between arrogance and dignity had never been clearer. And in that clarity, the country found itself staring into the mirror. This wasn't just about one marriage. It was about the essence of fairness itself. Could America honor its immigrant roots while its leader tried to erase them? Could family values mean anything if they were applied selectively, twisted for convenience? Obama's restraint added gravity. He didn't push harder yet, didn't need to. The power of the moment lay in what was unsaid, in the truths hanging uncomfortably in the air. Trump's own household had become a symbol, not of contradiction alone, but of the universality of the immigrant story. And with every second that passed, the hall grew heavier with the realization. This confrontation was more than political theater. It was a battle over identity, over who truly belonged, over whether dignity could survive the corrosive force of hypocrisy. Obama had cracked open the facade, and everyone knew there was more beneath it. This wasn't just about Melania. This was about the truth Trump never wanted exposed. Long before that debate stage, Trump had carved out his reputation on one of the most divisive themes in American politics: fear of the outsider. From the very first day he descended that golden escalator, his message was sharpened like a blade. Immigrants, he declared, were not dreamers, not builders, not part of the nation's heartbeat. They were criminals, job takers, threats. He painted with the broadest brush, using language that reduced millions of stories to caricatures and millions of lives to a political talking point. The crowds roared, the cameras fixated, and Trump thrived on the seated chaos. His campaign rallies became carnivals of anger, punctuated by chants and slogans that reduced human beings into enemies. The wall, his infamous promise, wasn't just about border security. It was a theater, a symbol meant to divide, to project dominance. The more outrageous the words, the more the spotlight followed him, and he wanted that spotlight, needed it, but the contradiction was always there, lurking in plain sight. At his side was Melania, whose own journey to America was defined by visas, paperwork, and the very legal paths he often dismissed as scams or loopholes. Her story was not unique. It mirrored that of countless immigrants who came chasing opportunity, determined to make something more of their lives. Yet for Trump, her path was an exception, a silence he demanded everyone else observe. When it came to others, he vilified. When it came to his own family, he demanded respect, privacy, and reverence. That hypocrisy was not lost on his critics. Every time he launched into tirades about chain migration, commentators pointed out that Melania's parents had gained citizenship through the very process he condemned. Every time he spoke about the dangers of immigrants stealing jobs, they reminded audiences that his businesses relied on foreign workers brought in under special visas. And yet, he doubled down, never flinching, never acknowledging the double standard. Arrogance was his armor. But that armor cracked in moments of pressure. On debate stages, when confronted by facts, Trump's composure wavered. His voice rose, his hands flailed, his words spilled out in frantic streams. He was at his most rattled, not when discussing policy, but when his image was challenged, to be exposed as inconsistent, as hypocritical, as vulnerable. Those were wounds he could not hide. At rallies when protesters interrupted, his face hardened, his temper flared. He threatened, Enid, he mocked. He lashed out with insults designed to humiliate. The crowd cheered, but the pattern was clear. Power sustained him, but insecurity haunted him. That insecurity deepened whenever the subject touched Melania. Though she stood silently by his side, the questions about her immigration story, her background, even her accent, always struck a nerve. Trump's defensiveness grew sharpest here, his temper most brittle. To admit her immigrant story as valid was to admit that the stories he demonized were valid too, and that was a bridge he could not cross. So instead, he built a wall around the subject, guarded with anger, reinforced with denial. Over time, the contradiction became part of the larger mythos of Trump himself. To his supporters, he was untouchable, the man who said what no one else would say. To his critics, He was the embodiment of hypocrisy, the loudest voice against immigrants who lived under the roof of one. And in the middle stood Melania, silent, dignified, yet undeniably central to the tension between the myth and the man. Every meltdown Trump had in public carried echoes of that insecurity. When pressed on details he couldn't control, he attacked the press. When confronted by opponents with sharper wit, he ridiculed their looks, their intelligence, their backgrounds. He turned every challenge into a spectacle of rage, as though the performance itself could drown out the truth. But deep down, the pattern betrayed him. The louder the voice, the thinner the skin. The greater the arrogance, the deeper the insecurity. That night on live television, all of it came crashing together. Obama's remark wasn't just a clever line. It was a trigger pulled on years of contradictions. Trump's political empire was built on vilifying immigrants, yet his personal empire was stitched together by one. The irony was unbearable, the hypocrisy undeniable. And for a man who prided himself on dominance, the exposure of weakness was the ultimate humiliation. The cameras didn't miss it. The world didn't miss it. His face, his voice, his unraveling, every detail told the story of a man trapped by his own contradictions. The villain who claimed to be untouchable was now cornered by the truth he could never reconcile. And that insecurity was about to explode on live TV. To understand the force behind Obama's words that night, one must first understand the story that shaped him. Long before he stood beneath the unforgiving glare of television lights, he carried within him a personal narrative that mirrored the very promise of America. A narrative of belonging, struggle, and dignity, forged in the fires of difference. His father, Barack Obama Sr., came from Kenya, drawn to the United States by the idea that education could transform not just an individual life, but an entire family's future. His mother, Ann Dunham, was from Kansas, a heartland daughter whose belief in hard work and resilience ran deep in her blood. From the beginning, Obama's very existence defied the narrow boxes that America often tried to impose. He was the son of an immigrant, the product of a marriage that bridged continents, cultures, and races. He grew up navigating multiple worlds: Hawaii's island life, Indonesia's bustling streets, and the complex identity of a child who carried both the legacy of Africa and the Midwestern plains within him. This diversity wasn't just an accident of birth, it became his compass. From an early age, he recognized that dignity wasn't a privilege for a select few, but a birthright for all. The stories around his dinner table, the voices he heard in classrooms and communities, the experiences of people who came from every corner of the globe, all of it etched in him a belief that America's strength lay not in its divisions, but in its tapestry. That belief followed him through the rough edges of his youth, the restless search for identity, the questions of belonging that so many immigrants and children of immigrants wrestle with. But instead of turning bitterness into anger, he turned struggle into empathy. He listened more than he spoke. When Obama rose to national prominence, it wasn't just because he had policies to sell, it was because he embodied a story millions recognized as their own. The son of a Kenyan father could stand before the nation and say, "I am proof of what is possible." And people believed him, not out of blind loyalty, but because his life testified to the truth of his words. Immigrant families saw in him the validation they had long craved, that their sacrifices mattered, their presence belonged, their children could rise to the highest office in the land. That same history sculpted his debate style. Where others blustered, he was calm. Where rivals attacked with heat, he responded with measured precision. He never needed to shout to command a room. His silence alone could create anticipation. His pauses more powerful than a flood of words. He didn't fight to dominate. He fought to reveal. Each line he delivered carried the weight of intellect sharpened by lived experience. Time and again, his opponents tried to bait him into losing composure. They mocked his background, his name, even his birth. They hurled insults designed to strip away his dignity. But instead of sinking to their level, he transformed their attacks into proof of his strength. By refusing to break, he showed that dignity wasn't fragile, it was unshakable. And that's why, on the night when Trump sneered and shouted, when the stage quaked with arrogance and denial, Obama's presence stood in such stark contrast. He wasn't just countering a political opponent. He was standing as the son of an immigrant, the embodiment of America's ever-expanding story, the living rebuttal to the idea that immigrants weakened the country. His life said otherwise. His very existence said otherwise. Public service had only deepened that conviction. From organizing on the south side of Chicago to standing in the Senate chamber, he ride stories of single mothers working double shifts, of immigrant families running corner stores, of children learning English with hope in their voices. Each story reinforced the truth he held dear. America's greatness wasn't in shutting people out, but in letting them in. His presidency itself had been the ultimate proof of that principle. So when the spotlight swung to him that night and the topic turned to Melania, Obama wasn't just delivering a sharp line. He was calling upon decades of lived experience, the lessons of his parents, the struggles of his community, the hopes of immigrants who had whispered prayers into the night for their children's future. He was speaking as someone who knew that dignity was not a debating tactic, but a way of life. And that's why his words carried such power. They were not abstract. They were not detached. They were born of a man whose life was intertwined with the very story Trump tried to erase. The contrast could not have been sharper. Arrogance versus humility, division versus unity, fear versus dignity. The audience felt it in their bones, even if they couldn't put it into words. Obama wasn't lecturing. He wasn't grandstanding. He was embodying. He was living proof that the American dream was not a slogan, but a reality forged through sacrifice and belief. And in that debate hall, as Trump simmered and seethed, that truth became a weapon sharper than any insult. Because Obama knew that his own story, the story of an immigrant's son, was the perfect counter to Trump's hypocrisy. And that personal history gave him the perfect ammunition in this moment. The moment Obama's remark about Melania settled into the air, Trump lunged to reclaim control. His voice shot out, sharp and frantic, slicing through the murmur of the crowd. "That's a lie. That's a disgrace. You don't talk about my wife," he barked, jabbing a finger across the stage. His interruptions came in waves, louder each time, as though sheer volume could erase what had just been said. But the more he shouted, the clearer his desperation became. He tried to pivot to jobs, to borders, to law and order. He invoked slogans, repeated lines his supporters had memorized. Yet every word sounded more like deflection, more like scrambling. His face flushed with anger, his cadence breaking into fragments. He wasn't debating anymore. He was unraveling. The audience felt the shift. They had seen Trump fiery before, but this was different. This wasn't dominance. It was panic disguised as bravado. The hall pulsed with tension, the silence between his shouts more deafening than the shouts themselves. Commentators at the side table leaned into their mics, whispering with disbelief. "He's rattled," one murmured, almost unable to contain the shock. And through it all, Obama remained still. He didn't rush to respond, didn't match the volume. He let Trump's words hang in the air like arrows that never hit their mark. His silence was unnerving, his calm almost unbearable for a man like Trump who thrived on chaos. Each second Obama withheld his response, the pressure mounted. The cameras cut from Trump's reddened face to Obama's composed expression. The contrast stark, undeniable. Finally, Obama leaned forward. He spoke not with anger, but with surgical precision, choosing words that landed heavier than shouts ever could. "This isn't about your wife," he said evenly. "It's about the way you treat millions of families like hers, as if their stories don't matter." His voice cut through the tension like steel. The room hushed, the audience holding its breath. Trump tried to jump back in, tried to steamroll over him with another outburst. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know her story," he snapped, waving his arms wildly. But this time, the interruption only magnified the contrast. Where Trump was heat and noise, Obama was steady, deliberate. The cameras caught the faces in the crowd, some leaning forward in awe, others covering their mouths as though they couldn't believe what they were hearing. The divide was widening with every second. Trump's storm of words was losing ground to Obama's calm insistence on truth. Obama let another silence linger before speaking again. Each pause was a spotlight, forcing every eye back to him. He reminded the audience that America's identity had always been forged by immigrants, that families like Melania's were part of the nation's story, not an exception to it. His words weren't just rebuttals, they were revelations, carefully chosen to pierce through the bluster and reach the heart of the matter. The heat in the room grew thicker, the drama undeniable. Commentators exchanged glances. The crowd whispered, some even applauding softly before being hushed. On television screens across the country, households sat stunned. The narrative had flipped. Trump, once the aggressor, now seemed cornered, and Obama, once the target, was now firmly in control of the stage. Every camera angle told the same story. Trump waving his hands, his face twisted in outrage, while Obama's calm presence radiated authority. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a duel of character, and the contrast could not have been sharper. Then came the moment the tension demanded. Obama leaned in, his tone lower, more deliberate, as though preparing to draw the line no one saw coming. The hall fell silent again, the nation holding its breath. The clash was no longer simmering. It was reaching the point of eruption. But then, Obama stopped holding back. The silence was electric. Cameras zoomed in close enough to capture the flicker in Trump's eyes, the twitch at the corner of his mouth. His body leaned forward, shoulders hunched, fists half-clenched at the podium, waiting for a counterpunch he was sure he could swat away. But Obama didn't rush. He let the quiet stretch, let the nation lean in. Every heartbeat in the hall felt amplified, every breath suspended in anticipation. Then, softly at first, Obama began. "You know, Donald," he said, his voice smooth but edged with gravity, "I've always believed that the measure of a leader isn't how loud they shout, but how they treat people whose stories they don't share." His words landed like stones in a still pond, ripples spreading through the audience. Trump shifted, uneasy, muttering under his breath. Obama paused, just long enough to let Trump's fidgeting become the spectacle. Then he continued. "You talk about immigrants as if they're a threat, as if they're something less than American. But you forget, your own wife came here as an immigrant." The line struck like lightning. Gasps echoed across the hall, a wave of shock rippling through the crowd. For a moment, even the commentators froze, mouths slightly open as they scrambled to process what they'd just heard. Trump's face went pale, then flushed crimson, as though the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He tried to speak, but his mouth only opened and closed, soundless. Obama didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned into the microphone, steady, deliberate. Her journey, the courage it takes to leave one country and build a life in another, is the very story you spend your rallies mocking. The very people you try to turn into enemies are the people who make America what it is. The audience erupted, a blend of applause, cheers, and incredulous laughter. So, me stood, clapping, unable to contain the surge of emotion. Others just shook their heads in awe, whispering, "Did he just say that?" The cameras caught it all. The spark in Obama's eyes, the stunned silence in Trump's, the crowd's eruption that felt like a tidal wave. Trump tried to cut in, voice cracking with fury. "That's disgusting. Don't talk about her. That's low, even for you." His words stumbled over each other, jagged and uneven. His hands gripped the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sweat beaded at his temples, visible even under the bright studio lights. But Obama didn't waver. He let Trump's outburst echo, let it hang like empty noise. Then, with the timing of a seasoned orator, he pressed forward. "This isn't an attack on her, Donald. This is a reminder to you and to America that every immigrant, whether they come from Slovenia or Mexico or Kenya, carries dignity. That dignity doesn't disappear just because you find it politically convenient to mock it." The line sliced through the tension, sharp and undeniable. Trump shook his head, muttering, "Wrong, wrong," but the damage was already visible. His once commanding presence had shrunk. His shoulders slumped. His eyes darted nervously toward the moderators as if searching for rescue. The cameras captured it mercilessly. Every twitch, every falter. Obama's delivery grew more precise with each word. He didn't need theatrics. His calmness was the weapon. When you demean immigrants, you're not just insulting nameless faces at the border. You're insulting the story of your own family. You're denying the very truth standing beside you on that stage. The audience gasped again, some even laughing in disbelief at the audacity of the moment. Commentators clutched their notes, shaking their heads, whispering frantically into microphones. The control room scrambled to decide which camera angle best captured the collision of two worlds. The calm professor dismantling the blustering showman. Trump leaned forward, veins tightening at his neck. "That's fake! Fake news right there!" he snapped, pointing across the stage. But the words fell flat, swallowed by the roar of the crowd. His voice no longer commanded. It cracked, it strained, it begged. Obama let the noise subside before delivering the blow that sealed the moment. "Donald, you've built your campaign on the idea that immigrants don't belong. But the truth is this. If America had listened to voices like yours in the past, your wife wouldn't be here, your family wouldn't be here, and neither would mine. Immigrants don't weaken us. They are us. They're the story of America itself." The explosion of applause was deafening. People rose to their feet, clapping, whistling, some wiping tears from their eyes. The hall felt alive, the energy surging like a tide that couldn't be held back. On screens across the country, living rooms erupted in cheers, tweets flew, hashtags were born in real time. And there stood Trump, diminished under the glare of the cameras. He tried to sneer, but his lips quivered. He tried to smirk, but it collapsed into a grimace. He had no counter, no punchline, no slogan strong enough to patch the wound. His body language betrayed him, slouched shoulders, darting eyes, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. Obama didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply stood tall, gaze steady, embodying the very calm Trump could never touch. That restraint made the takedown even sharper, the contrast undeniable. The commentators could barely contain themselves. That was extraordinary," one whispered. "I've never seen Trump this rattled." Another added, "That wasn't just a debate point. That was history." Trump muttered under his breath, shaking his head, but the microphones picked up fragments. "Disgrace. Unfair. Low blow." His words only deepened the image of a man losing grip, in real time. Obama, meanwhile, allowed one final pause, letting the applause wash over the stage before speaking again. "This isn't about politics. It's about who we are. And no amount of shouting can change the truth, that America's strength has always come from its immigrants." The words echoed, long after they were spoken. The crowd was still clapping, still buzzing, even as the moderators struggled to regain control. It was no longer a debate. It was a moment of reckoning. Trump's lips tightened, his body rigid with fury. He gestured wildly toward the moderators, demanding to move on, desperate to escape the glare of the spotlight that now burned too hot. But no matter what came next, the image was seared into the nation's memory. Obama standing calm, unwavering, while Trump looked broken under the weight of his own hypocrisy. And as the cameras panned across the audience one last time, capturing the stunned faces, the whispers, the applause still lingering, one truth became clear. The internet would soon explode. But in this room, Trump had already lost. The moment the debate ended, the world outside the hall detonated. Social media lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. Within minutes, hashtags flooded Twitter. Immigrants are America. Obama mic drop at Trump meltdown. Clips of Obama's calm takedown looped endlessly, shared millions of times before moderators had even wrapped their closing remarks. TikToks appeared within the hour, remixing Obama's line, "Your own wife came here as an immigrant," into beats, skits, and even dance trends. Teenagers who had never watched a debate before were suddenly quoting the exchange in hallways and group chats. On Instagram, memes spread like wildfire. One showed Trump's frozen face with the caption, "When your hypocrisy comes back to haunt you." Another split-screened Obama's calm stare beside Trump's sweaty grimace. Tags. D simply, hero versus villain. The internet wasn't just reacting, it was reveling. For millions, the clip was more than entertainment. But the moment wasn't just comedy. It was personal. Across immigrant households, living rooms erupted in a different kind of cheer. Families who had been told for years that they didn't belong, that their accents or traditions made them less American, suddenly felt seen. One Mexican-American mother posted a video of herself watching the clip with her teenage son, tears in her eyes. Finally, someone said it. Finally. A Somali father in Minneapolis tweeted, "Obama spoke for us all. My kids will grow up knowing they're part of America, no matter what Trump says." Facebook feeds filled with parents explaining to their children why the exchange mattered, why dignity had just won a round against cruelty. Commentators framed it as more than a viral moment. Political analysts on CNN replayed the clip, calling it the turning point of the debate season. A veteran strategist remarked, "This wasn't policy, it was identity." Obama tapped into the heartbeat of America, the immigrant story that Trump has tried to erase. And it worked because it wasn't just about politics, it was about humanity. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow leaned into the moment with gravity. When a leader reminds us that immigrants are not threats but the essence of America itself, that's not a debate zinger. That's a defining statement in our history. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign scrambled. Advisors huddled late into the night, voices raised, searching for a way to spin what millions had already seen. Statements were drafted, redrafted, and scrapped. Some aides suggested doubling down, painting Obama as disrespectful for mentioning Melania. Others argued to pivot entirely, to distract with a fresh controversy. But no one could escape the images. Trump sweating, stumbling, muttering fake news, while Obama stood unshaken. Damage control felt futile when the world had already chosen its narrative. Fox News on Cho. Ours did their best to cushion the blow, cutting the clip short, reframing it as a low attack on family. Yet even within conservative circles, whispers spread that Trump had looked weak, something his brand could least afford. Behind closed doors, donors called operatives, worried that the performance signaled vulnerability. In politics, weakness is blood in the water, and sharks were already circling. By morning, the ripple effects were undeniable. Newspapers carried headlines that read like verdicts. Obama's immigrant line shakes debate stage. Trump rattled by Melania remark. America's story versus Trump's anger. The clip led every morning show, dissected frame by frame. Obama's poise contrasted endlessly against Trump's unraveling. And through it all, ordinary Americans kept sharing their own stories. Twitter threads sprang up where people recounted their parents' journeys, their grandparents' sacrifices, their pride in belonging to a nation of immigrants. The takedown had ignited something larger, a wave of identity affirmation that stretched far beyond the debate. People weren't just laughing at Trump's meltdown, they were reclaiming the story of America itself. Trump, for once, had no script strong enough to reclaim control. His bluster had met a wall, his contradictions laid bare. The campaign could try to spin, but the image was burned into the public mind. A man undone by his own hypocrisy, standing across from a leader who reminded America of its better self. And as the chatter grew louder, as memes multiplied and stories poured in, one question began to echo in every corner of the nation. If this was just one night, what would come next?